Mr. Hoffman, if you haven't met him already, if you didn't come to his talk earlier this week, this is Mr. Hoffman. He is an expert at many things, but today he's going to zoom in on one particular, well, not one particular, one area, one aspect. I'm going to release it over to him in just a second. I'm going to talk to y'all through him. I want y'all to know that he's here to speak. Then maybe we'll have 5 minutes of questions, and then I'll release you to go to lunch. So let me say, he's here to give information. He's giving you information. Then we'll open it up to questions you might have, and then we'll release to lunch. Any questions on that? Okay, I'll let you. Lunch is at, we'll probably need, thank you. We probably need to release at 11:20 from here, so that's about 45. Does that sound good? Okay.
All right, we're going to jump right into it. We don't have much time. Any questions, just kind of raise your hand or just ask me. Can you see her right down there? All right, can you? I'll make sure. Okay, so who was here for the lecture last time? Okay, some of y'all, but not all of y'all. All right, so we'll just go over some slides. And initially, we have to create the whole atmosphere, because what the discussion is, last time it was World War I briefly, how Hitler rose to power, World War II and the concentration camps, and the Holocaust. This will be more focused on the U.S. involvement in World War II and the Japanese theater of war, which we did not touch on at all last time. And the unique nature of Japan rising up in this military aspect and the Nazis rising up is extremely unique, because two of them are very, very similar. They're very vicious and brutal, and it's part of history, so we have to learn it. Okay, so as we get into this, we talked about in World War I, the map of Europe. This is Germany. These are all these countries in Europe. But look how big Russia is. I mean, that is a huge country. And everybody in Europe was always terrified of Russia because they just had so many people. And when they attacked, I mean, this is where the Mongols came from. This is where the Cossacks, this is where all these armies came from that just wiped out everybody. But we're going to talk about way over here. And this is a war that Russia had with little old Japan. And Japan fought back. Russia wanted a little piece of territory over here. Japan wanted some territory also. And this will be the first time in the history of the world that a country from here defeated a European power. And pictures are very hard to come in this part of the world. It just was not as prevalent as what you'd have over here. So these are Russian soldiers fighting with their traditional Cossack hats on. It's very hard to see. These are Japanese. And Japanese actually are much more organized, much more mechanized. And they defeated the Russians. And it was the first time a European power was defeated by, as they say, an Eastern power. And this is right before World War I. And it surprised the whole world. Because remember, World War I is so devastating. We're talking 30, 40 million people died. Wars before that, you'd have maybe 100,000 people die, 150,000 die. Here you have 40, 50 million people die. You just have machine guns and artillery, and they just blew each other up so bad. And it terrified the whole world. We said, we're never going to have a war like that again. And they put all the tanks and planes and artillery, they took them to the ocean and dumped them in the ocean. So we had the Versailles Treaty, where they talked about the end of World War I and what would happen, how they divided up the countries, and they made all these little countries here, and this is just how they divided up. Russia, after they lost in World War I, they got rid of the Tsar, and the communists took over, and it became the Soviet Union. And we covered a lot of this in the last lecture. This is the League of Nations. This is what was formed after World War I. All the countries got together and says, we're going to, instead of having wars, we're all going to talk about it in the League of Nations. Problem was, the United States didn't want to join. And so it really didn't have much power, because after World War I, the United States was a powerful country. What's happening in the United States?
Great
Late
Depression.
20s and 30s, Great Depression, correct. These are kids trying to get some food. It was a tough time. Every country in the world was suffering through the Great Depression. Which country pulled out of it quicker? We talked about last time.
USA.
Not at all.
Germany.
Germany, that's right. Germany pulled out. They were able to make the Autobahn and make the highways connecting the cities and the factories, and that's how they were able to get products moving quicker. Who's this?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Franklin Roosevelt. And who was he?
He was the president.
What?
United States.
United States, very good. And he brought us out of the Great Depression. He put a bunch of people to work. In Japan, remember they beat the Russians we just talked about? They were also on the winning side of World War I. And there was no death and destruction in Japan. Europe was devastated by artillery shells. All of the tens of millions of people died. Japan didn't see any of this. Japan had never actually seen, you have generations of guys who really never actually seen the destruction of war. And they fell in love with their military. Anything military in Japan, they loved it, they adored it. They had parades, and this is all they did, is just praise the military. And the military could do no wrong. They just won the last two wars. They beat the Russians, and they won World War I. So they decided, this is Japan. It's about the size of the East Coast. So you picture Maine all the way down to Florida. That's the size of Japan. And they have about half as many people as the United States. So it's actually a large-sized country. And they owned Korea at the time. And they decided, you know, we need to go up into Manchuria because they have a lot of natural resources. Minerals they need to make tanks and chemicals. They have a lot of steel and iron. And they just need the resources. Japan doesn't really have anything here. They don't have oil. And we'll discuss oil later. So they go into Manchuria and they attack and they take it over. This is them going in. This is their battle flag. It's the rising sun battle flag. And it's red. And, see them? Oh yeah, there's going to be some pictures in here that are pretty serious for you. Yep, they attacked all of China. This is them bombing Shanghai. This is an extremely famous picture of a little baby suffering here, the bombing. And the Japanese didn't like the Chinese. They felt that they just didn't. I mean, they felt that they were superior to the Chinese. And here they rounded up a bunch of the Chinese, and they, just as the Nazis did with the Jews, and they did some terrible things to them. The Japanese military killed more Chinese civilians than Hitler killed Jews. Yeah. Almost twice as many. So Japan here, they attacked China. And of course, the United States doesn't like that. The U.S. is saying, hey, that's, you know, you're doing some really bad stuff over there. And it's hard to get information out, but we knew we didn't like what they're doing. So we said, okay, we're not going to sell any more oil. Remember at the time, the U.S. was producing a lot of oil. We're not going to sell any more oil to Japan. Japan says, you know, we need oil. Make their ships run. So the Nazis have taken over Germany. A lot of people were not excited about that. Some were. And Germany starts attacking all the countries. Remember that they attacked Poland? Remember, this is one of the planes in the Polish Air Force, and we show the German planes, dive bombers. Polish, as many armies in Europe, were just not as advanced as the Germans. This is the Polish attack against the Germans, and the Germans fighting back. Germany eventually attacks France and defeats France in just a couple of weeks. Europe was crushed. All of Europe was now taken over by Germany. And of course, this is very summarized, which is much more detailed last time. And this is all before the Americans were even part of the war. Americans are like, what, that's y'all's problem. We lost a lot of guys in World War I. So this is where we are here. Did we talk about why Switzerland was neutral? Why is Switzerland not taken over by Germany? Who knows? Yes?
Because they were friends. Are they Hitler and the president?
No? Okay. Swiss guy here? Yes, sir. They were neutral? Well, so was Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg. Ever heard of a Swiss bank account? So a lot of rich folks like to hide money in Swiss bank accounts. They hide it there, don't have to pay particular taxes on it. Well, all dictators like to hide their money in banks in other countries. So this is where the Nazis hid a bunch of their money in Switzerland. In case they get thrown out of office, they can go and get their money out. Money they stole. So in the Eastern Front, the Russians and Germans are fighting. Millions upon millions are dying. And look at this type of warfare. Minus 30 degrees fighting like that. We talked about the oil. America cut off oil to Japan. Japan started sending soldiers into Dutch East Indies. The Netherlands, Holland controls this area, the Netherlands. But the Netherlands has just fallen to Germany. So they really weren't up to fighting anybody. So this is where the Japanese started taking control of. And this is the Japanese fighting. These are the oil fields. This is a really rare picture here. Yeah, so this is the Japanese in the oil fields in Borneo, Indonesia.
Will you put that, will you slide right back?
Certainly. I can
So
send it
look
to you.
at that, wow.
Yeah, the Japanese have just a different type of warfare. They had the United States military educated the Japanese military in formations and structure. And then they used much more of the tactics of what we have in the American Revolution, how, you know, we kind of sneak up and hide, and the other guys are standing up, waiting to get shot. What is this here? Who knows? Who recognizes? Spit it out. Pearl Harbor. Very good.
See some people starting to write.
Yeah, battleships here. Pearl Harbor was an ideal deep-sea port. And the Japanese attacked. Japanese attacked because they felt they could knock us out quickly. They could knock out our battleships. Battleships was the most important ship on the ocean at the time, as far as anybody knew. Battleships were powerful. I mean, look at these big old cannons right here. It would blast anybody, right? And the Japanese had submarines on their planes. Had torpedoes. Every time they dropped a torpedo in the water, it sunk. So they put little wings of wood on it. So when it hit the water, it kind of stayed up a bit. And it run right into our battleships. And this is some rare footage. These are actual planes right here. You can see them attacking. This is shot from a Japanese fighter. And another from this is over one of our airfields there, Clark Air Force Base. And this is how the Japanese planes would take off the aircraft carriers. And so they snuck all the way across from Japan, all across the ocean to Hawaii. Was Hawaii a state at the time?
No.
That's right, just a territory.
Territory.
So their planes took off from their aircraft carriers. They flew over and wiped out our Navy, except what did they not find at Pearl Harbor?
Oil.
The battleships.
They found all the battleships. Our aircraft carriers, they happen to be in maneuvers. That saved the U.S. One of our battleships, when they dropped a bomb, it actually went right down into the magazine, which is where we kept all of our artillery shells, and the whole ship blew up. And all the sailors on that ship, most of them didn't even wake up yet. The whole thing just sunk right there. Yeah, they wiped out all our battleships. But they didn't get their carriers. We were lucky. All right, so they attacked Pearl Harbor. But that's not all Japan did. At the same hour, They attacked Hong Kong, which is run by the British. They attacked the Philippines, which was U.S. territory. Why did we have the Philippines? Where did we get them from?
I forgot.
The Spanish-American War. Remember, we went to war with Spain, and when we beat them, we took all the possessions. We took the Philippines for one. We had Cuba, Puerto Rico. So they attacked, and in the same hour, they attacked all of these Western, which would be British and American bases. And they did it fast, too. They went into Hong Kong and clobbered them, took all the British guys, they took all the American soldiers, these American soldiers in the Philippines in what's called Bataan, the Bataan Death March. 67,000 Americans surrendered, which was the largest in history. They surrendered the Japanese and they marched them. They marched about 80 miles. They're allowed to sit here, but if you're marched 80 miles, you want to take a break, right? Well, if you take a break and not at the time they tell you, they put a bayonet in you. Yeah, they were vicious and brutal, and if one of your guys hurt his leg and he stopped for a second, they'll shoot him too. So you pick your buddy up or he gets killed. And the Japanese, they were, they would come down and like in Singapore, let me get back to this map here. So Singapore is right down here. Very, very, very significant place. And the Japanese came right down here, and every time the British would send their soldiers up here to stop, the Japanese went around. They'd sneak around the water. Around this way, went behind them. And they kept beating the British. The British kept falling back, further and further back, and they fell back onto the island of Singapore. The Japanese kept attacking and going back and forth. And so on a Friday, you had 105,000 British soldiers in Singapore. And they just had 30,000 brand new soldiers from India and Australia to join them. So had 135,000 soldiers. Some guys had only been there for 3 days. And they decided to surrender to the Japanese. Japanese had planes attacking, they had artillery attacking. Japanese had so many soldiers here that the British surrendered. And they marched out, put their hands up, and the 135,000 British and Australian and Indian soldiers looked up and felt that they just surrendered to only 30,000 Japanese. And they're like, where's the rest of your army? They said, shut up or we'll bayonet you. 135,000 soldiers surrendered to only 30,000 Japanese. And that was the biggest defeat in the history of the British Empire. So Japan has now, this was French Indochina, which is now Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos. But France had already surrendered to Germany, so France was not much in a position to defend themselves. So Japan now has all of this area right here, taking all this over, and now they're ready to invade Pearl Harbor. They send their aircraft carriers, and we send our aircraft carriers out to meet them. They send their battleships, we send our battleships, because at the time, remember, the battleships were more important. But our planes take off, and our planes are up in the air, and their planes are up in the air. And some of our fighters are fighting, but actually our planes are up there looking for their carriers and their battleships to drop bombs on them. They're looking for ours. But it's a big ocean. They couldn't find each other. We found one of their battleships and wiped it out. And then people started to realize, battleships aren't worth anything anymore. Aircraft carriers, planes. We found one of our carriers blew up. But you know what? We lost one carrier, they lost 4 carriers. And it was out of luck too, pure luck. We couldn't find their carriers, and we said, we got to turn around. We got to come back, get more fuel. And guys said, wait, we got 1 more minute. And God looked over there and saw their carriers and knocked them out. So they lost 4 carriers. And they could no longer attack Pearl Harbor. So they said, okay, we're going to go down and attack Australia for the Battle of the Coral Sea. Same situation. Our planes are looking for their planes. They hit one of our carriers. These are guys jumping off into the ocean as the carrier sinks. but we knocked out 3 of their carriers. And now they can't fly planes that have no carriers, and planes are coming back to land and there's no carrier to land in. So we now have superiority in the air. At the same time.
Actually, it's 5 to 11, we're fine.
Excellent. So this is the height of the Germans here. Russians and Germans are fighting. Like I said, tens of millions are dying out there. Where does America, now that they're in the war, where do they land first? Where do they attack first? They attack right here, Morocco. We've not really been in a fight. We've not had our soldiers on the ground fighting anybody since World War I. So we land, and France lost to Germany, and their soldiers are ordered, now you're on the side of Germany, you've got to fight with Germany. And the French are like, kind of, we'll kind of fight with you. So the Americans landed, some of the French actually shot at them. But they quickly convinced them, hey, we're on your side. And the Americans just kind of walked right on in. But they ran into somebody that was considered one of the greatest generals in the history of the world, German General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. Multiple times he was outnumbered fighting the British in North Africa and would always win. And we ran right up against him. It's Erwin Rommel there. And we ran against him. There's pictures of Rommel in American tanks when we went and fought into Iraq, because he's such a respected tank general and his tactics. And Americans had our Sherman tanks, which are pretty good. Germans had their tanks, but their tactics were better. What they would do is they'd send some really small, weak Italian tanks to attack the Americans, and they'd shoot, and their tanks would run away, and of course our tanks would chase them, and they chased them right into a trap where they had 88 guns, 88 artillery police. They went right into the middle, and we just blasted them. Just wiped them out. And then another thing is when our Sherman tanks are lined up like this, and they see one tank coming at them, one German tank coming at them real fast, and they're like, well, we don't know what the heck that is, and the tank is coming, and all of a sudden the other tanks branch out behind it real fast. Those the tactics that Rommel had used just wiped out the Americans out of a battle called Kesselring Pass. That's our tanks getting blasted. But the British were coming from the other side of Africa, and Rommel said, we just have to get out of here. So they left and went back up into Italy. So now that the Japanese carriers have been sunk, Americans can now fight their way back island by island to get the territory back and push back and defeat Japan. But it wasn't easy. These are Americans landing on Guadalcanal. The Japanese were entrenched. You know, there was a Japanese soldier, because the Japanese were told, you stay in your position until you die. Okay? And there's a Japanese soldier that was still in his position on an island in the Pacific until 1974. That means for 30 years after the war, he still stayed in his position. And they eventually had to go find his commanding officer in Japan, and they had to bring him to that island to get on the loudspeaker. Says, hey, dude, come on out, war's over. They were that disciplined.
30 years.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. All right, so this is the type of fighting that these guys had to endure, similar to what the fighting was we had in Vietnam in the 60s. We never fought like that before. Now we get to Normandy. All right, so we have now taken over this part here, and we've pushed up into Italy. The Russians are coming here to defeat Germany, but the Americans need to land here. They tried to land here once, and the Germans pushed them back. It wasn't a big invasion, it's Canadians and British, and the Germans just pushed them back. They decided to land here at Normandy. And there's General Patton before he, General Eisenhower before he was president, getting the men motivated. talking hundreds of thousands of soldiers landed at the beach, largest amphibious invasion ever. Anybody seen the movie Saving Private Ryan? Yeah, that's what it was like. Remember when they were here, when all the bullets came through and all those guys? Yeah, that's what these guys had to go through. Because you know who was waiting for them on the beach? The Germans, but who was the general at the time? Erwin Rommel. So we just had too many guys, and just we just came on too strong, and it was like hundreds of thousands of soldiers landed. And we also had a very good tank general, Patton. They even named the top tank after World War II, the Patton tank, after General Patton. And Patton was tough. He had a pistol with the white handle on it. I mean, he felt like he was reincarnated. He used to be in Caesar's army, Napoleon's army, and he was ready. All he did was just attack. And he and Rommel had some good battles. So after we landed at Normandy, we went through Paris. We pushed them all the way back to the German border. Germany was running like heck because we were coming on strong. The Russians coming on the other side, coming from down below with Americans into Italy, and Germany was just about done. We take Paris. It's funny, my mother was, I don't know if y'all ever went to, my mother actually grew up in Germany at the time. And when the Germans marched, they had metal on their boots, and you could hear it click, click, click every time they march up and down the street, you know, the whole formation. And she said one time she was walking down the street, and she kind of heard some ruffling come behind her. There's a whole division of American soldiers walking, and they have rubber boots, so they're all quiet when they walked. So everybody thought the war's over. Germany's done. Until what happens? Who knows? The Battle of the Bulge. Hitler decides, I'm going to take some of my really hardcore fighters that are fighting the Russians, because I got 50 divisions fighting the Russians. I'm going to take some divisions and bring them, and we're going to hit the Americans. And they do. No one expected Germany to do a counterattack. And it was an absolute pound right in the middle. To show you how big, so this is the way the line is. Germany's here, this is France, this is Paris. And this is the line, and it actually went just like this. And when Germany hit, it crushed right into the American line. And our guys, they've really not seen fighting like it, and not fighting from guys that have been fighting the Russians for 3 years. And those guys are hardcore. But fighting what they had to deal with on Russia, so they came and they really crushed the Americans. This is American half-track right back here. And it was a lot of cloud cover because our planes couldn't defend our soldiers because there was too much snow, too much cloud cover. The Germans wore white uniforms. Where'd they get that idea from? From the Russians. Where'd the Russians get the idea from? Finland. Remember, Finland used the white uniforms to hold back the Russians early on, 1939. And here's another tricky thing. There was a lot of Germans that had relatives in America, or some actually grew up in America and went back to Germany and could speak perfect English. So what they did is that they were soldiers, and they would go and put on American uniforms and would stand at crossroads. And as American tanks are coming to stop the Battle of the Bulge, stop the German advance, they'd say in English, wearing American uniforms, oh, you need to go that way. When the battle was actually that way. And this was all over the place. They had pretended to be American soldiers, speaking perfect English, leading our troops different directions. You get extra credit if you know this.
The T-34?
No. It's an American. It's a Wolverine. Actually, our tanks started getting a little better because we got wiped out so bad by Rommel. We had to learn we got to make a better tank. P-51 Mustang fighter. Looks a little different, doesn't it? It's got an air bubble. So when you fly in a jet right now, they change the pressure, don't they? They pressurize it. Sometimes your ears pop with the plane. Well, this is the first plane that was pressurized. This and the German jet fighter. But these planes could actually fight through, and when the fog and the snow clouds cleared, these fighters came in and knocked out all the German tanks. And the Battle of the Bulge ended, and Germany was pushed back again. Those fighters that we showed you, the P-51s, if I was a bomber, wanted to bomb Germany, fighters could only go this far from England. The P-51 fighters could go this far, so they could accompany our bombers into Germany. And when the Germans sent their fighters up, they didn't wipe out all of our bombers because they had to deal with fighters now. So this is what type of bomber is this? American bomber? What's it called? Flying Fortress B-17. And they drop bombs and they drop bombs. And my mother was in Germany, and she survived 86 bombing raids. She was living in the city of Dresden. Never been bombed before. Beautiful, stunning city, and 1,000 American bombers and British bombers bombed it. And flat, 300,000 people were killed. My mother just barely escaped. She was in Frankfurt when it was bombed. The air raid shelter collapsed. So she had to run out of the burning air raid shelter, run through the streets as the bombs were falling. She was in Essen when it was bombed, and she barely survived. She had to climb out of the rubble to survive that. So Italy now decides we don't like the dictator Mussolini, who's friends with Hitler. We don't like him. We're going to actually put him in jail, and we're going to join the Americans. So Italy switched sides and joined us, and they put Mussolini in jail. They put him on this prison on top of a mountain, and they surround the mountain with an Italian division to make sure nobody comes and gets him. And Hitler sends his commandos in there. They fly in there, and they rescue Mussolini, and they take him back to Hitler. And Mussolini says, Hitler, look, war's over. Italy's changed sides. The Americans are knocking on your doorstep. The Russians are about to wipe you out. And Hitler says, I got some secret weapons that are going to win the war for us. Mussolini says, yeah, right, but the first jet fighter ever, first jet anything, Me-262, Messerschmitt. Nothing in the air could touch it. And there was a movie last year that kind of had some American fighters shooting these down. Couldn't catch it. I mean, couldn't even close it. This is like 3 times faster than any American fighter. The only way these were shot is when they would slow down to land at an airfield, and that's when the American fighters would wipe them out. So what the Germans made was airfields that started here, but they ended in tunnels, in mountains. It's the only way they could protect the fighters. First cruise missile was created by the Germans. This is the same type of weaponry that we have today, the cruise missile. First intercontinental ballistic missile the Germans made. One of the reasons they attacked Norway was because they wanted to get heavy water. What do you use heavy water for? It's a component to make the atomic bomb. And they wanted to put an atomic bomb on top of a missile and have it reach New York. And they probably 6 or 7 months they would have been able to do that. But they collapsed too fast. And we had bombers like this. This is the first pressurized bomber. We talked about the P-51 Mustang. We talked about the Me-262, the jet fighter. And women made it. Men were fighting. Men were at the war. So the women stepped into the factories and they made these. Made planes, ships. Of course, after the war, they went back home and the men came into the factories. But a lot of the stuff was made by women. And a huge difference is German factories and Japanese factories are getting bombed. No one's bombing our factories, so we could just keep pumping out. And look at all these planes coming right out of here. With nobody bombing these factories. Look at Tokyo. A lot of wooden buildings in Tokyo. 150,000 people died. Bombing rate in Tokyo. 1,500 bombers. So Germany's about to collapse. German soldiers Not many left. You have to get children. The 12-year-old boy right here. This is an 11-year-old boy and a 12-year-old boy. Hitler is thanking them for defending him. The Russians were just too many. And the Russians captured Berlin. Lost almost 2 million Russian soldiers capturing Berlin. This is a train of Jews going to the concentration camps. And so late in the war, the second this train would have stopped at Auschwitz concentration camp, they all would have been machine gunned. But the Americans captured the train and saved all these people from certain death. Americans liberating the concentration camps, and they've never seen what they found in concentration camps. Eisenhower and Patton and all the American generals at the concentration camps blown away of the atrocities of the 6 million Jews that Hitler had killed and 2.5 million Russian prisoners of war that they killed in concentration camps. He ordered all the newspaper people to report on what they found in the concentration camps. And we have the atomic bomb created by our scientists. And a lot of discussion on the atomic bomb and whether we should use it or not. And we had air superiority, yes sir.
They used that 2 atomic bombs in Japan.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The first one, Hiroshima, they were really not sure this may actually ignite the oxygen, ignite the atmosphere. Do we really want to risk it? But they felt that Japan was so fierce in defending their islands that they'd be even more fierce defending their own country. And that if we would have tried to land on Japan and try to take it over, we would have lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers. So we felt we should drop the bomb to let them know that we have these types of weapons. And we should drop the second bomb to let them know we only have, if we drop one bomb, they only have just one. But if we drop 2, they think that we got a bunch of them. Yes? That's right. We didn't even give them a chance to surrender. We dropped 2 of them. And because we had air superiority, we could have probably told them that, hey, we're going to drop this bomb. They couldn't have stopped us. Their fighters could not get that high. Their artillery could not get that high. In my opinion, I think they should have dropped it in Tokyo Bay and not have to kill 100,000 people. But as they say, it's hindsight. So we dropped it in Hiroshima. We dropped it in Nagasaki. We killed overall about 170,000 people were killed by the 2 bombs, atomic bombs. And that really freaked out a lot of people. Because Japan, especially, the emperor, said enough of this military glorification. He gets on the radio, and it's the first time the people of Japan ever heard him talk on the radio. And he says, look, the war's over. They have atomic bombs. We can't win. And Japan surrendered.
Writers and readers, I need
And
to
that's it.
interrupt. Is Cragen in here? Cragen, we need you to check out, okay? And get your stuff and make sure you say thank you. Thank you.
And that is it. Thank you all very much. Any questions?
Hold on. Oh, you're not leaving. We're going to hear the questions. This is kind of like a question and answer. Kind of like we do it.